Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Janet Rosenzweig. I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of APSAC, the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, and I want to thank you all for joining us today and welcome you to this APSAC Zoom chat, the very popular feature that we've implemented since everyone changed the way we work in calendar 2020. First, a little bit of logistics. By now, everyone is probably a pretty advanced Zoomer, and we've learned a few things to make things go more smoothly. Let me suggest that you place your screen in speaker view. That will ensure that you are seeing the person who's speaking, and when our guest projects his slides, that will be the majority of your screen. Everyone participating today will be muted by the host. If you'd like to participate, and we hope you do, raise your hand if you have a question and we'll find you that way. The way you raise your hand is to click on the participant icon on the bottom of your screen, find your name and raise your hand. As the presentation progresses, please watch the chat box because resources mentioned while people are speaking will be presented in the chat box with some live links, which we think you'll find very helpful. If you enjoy our Zoom chats, our newsletters, and other resources, please consider joining APSAC. We know from experience that probably about half of you joining us today for this event probably haven't joined APSAC yet, and we welcome you to this event, and we welcome you as a member of APSAC. If you want to join today, you can use the discount code ZoomChat10 and have a 10% discount off your membership. We also know that COVID has brought havoc to the budgets of a lot of organizations and some individuals as well. We do not want financial issues to be a barrier to anyone joining APSAC or taking advantage of any of our resources. If you'd like special assistance, given the unusual year we're having, please drop us an email to info@apsac.org or executive-director@apsac.org, and we'll make sure that you and or your organization are able to become members of APSAC at a rate that you can afford. We also have a few events coming up we want to make sure everybody knows about. APSAC probably is best known, or at least it was to me before I joined as a member of the staff, for the phenomenal colloquia that are put on every year. And this year, our colloquia is going to be a little bit different, but no less phenomenal. We are going virtual for 3 days in September, 2 phenomenal keynote speakers, 9 different tracks on different topics at the very affordable price of $75 for APSAC members. Group rates available, discounts available if you need it. We really encourage you to check out the link that we're putting in the chat box, see all the fabulous speakers we've got set up for our colloquia, and do join us. What could be more amazing than having national experts like Vince Felitti and David Finkelhor and so many others talking to you directly from your own desktop while you're working from home. There's so much we've got to offer from that. We've also got our well-known forensic interview clinic is going virtual for 4 days in October, also at a very, very affordable price, and we very much encourage you. There's a link coming out in the chat box now. If you or any of the agencies in your community that do forensic interviewing are interested, we very much encourage you to check out our forensic interview clinic. And also we've got a scholarship fund available for that. So we, again, don't want financial issues to take anything away from anybody from participating in any of APSAC resources. Go through our website, check out the links to our library, check out the video links to our prior Zoom chats and our prior webinars. We want everything that we've worked so hard to make available really to help you strengthen your practice through knowledge, which is what APSAC's mission is. Want to take a second and introduce and thank the APSAC staff. We've got Alana Feldman behind the scenes with technology. We've got Stormer, who's our Manager of Publications and Special Projects, handling the chat box and any requests for information. I want to take a second and introduce our current president, Stacy Leblanc, the CEO of Upstream. So hi there, Stacy, and thank you for being with the Up Institute, moving upstream. I apologize for that, but thank you so much for your commitment to APSAC and for the prevention of child abuse. And now I'd like to introduce our immediate past president, Dr. David Corwin, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks to everyone who's in attendance. And, you know, I'm really excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Bob Sege. I'm going to get to that in just one second, but I want to tell you, I'm going to give you a sneak word of, this is like a sneak preview. APSAC is also collaborating with the Academy on Violence and Abuse and CAPSAC and an organization out in California called the Center for Innovation and Resources. We are putting on 10 one-hour webinars between now and next March that you can receive professional credit. The webinars will be free online. We're doing them live for California, prioritizing Medi-Cal providers. But after they occur, they will be archived up on the AVA website under ACES Academy, and anyone in the world can look at them and get CME and CE credit for watching those. And Bob is going to be one of our speakers next January. We're going to kick off the new year with Bob on that one. But Bob Sege is a professor at Tufts University School of Medicine, where he directs the new Center for Community Engaged Medicine. And he is a senior fellow at the Center for Study of Social Policy in Washington, part of the leadership of action team for Massachusetts Essentials for Childhood team. And he's on the board of the Massachusetts Children's Trust Fund, was on the board of, or is on the board of Prevent Child Abuse America now, and received a really outstanding award, the 2019 Ray E. Helfer Award from the Alliance of Children's Trust Funds and the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is just an amazing award. I also, relevant to his presentation today, he's the lead author of the AAP New Position Statement on Effective Discipline to Raise Healthy Children. That's a monumental sea change in the field, and is really kind of the centerpiece around which efforts to end corporal punishment in the United States revolve. And I also want to share on a personal note, Bob is very happy that his oldest son got married last week, I think it was, Bob. And so now there's a possibility that he can't just write about raising healthy children, but he can also maybe someday participate as a grandparent, which I'm told, well, I know firsthand, is the most joyous form of parenting. So thank you very much, Bob, for your willingness to join with us today and to present on this very important issue of corporal punishment in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. It's really a pleasure. I'm going to run through some PowerPoints. I just want to encourage people to ask questions or make comments in the chat box. And I have allowed or planned for enough time for discussion, because I think that in this group, there are a lot of people with a lot of expertise, and I have the honor of being the one to kick off the discussion, but I really think there's a lot to chew on in this. So just as a preview, I'm going to run through quickly the gist of the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement, what the scientific basis of it was. And Dave and I were just chatting earlier, and we expected a lot more pushback than we actually got. We got an enormous amount of media attention and a relatively small amount of cranky people. And now I think we understand that partly that's because there's been a generational shift in the use of corporal punishment, and as often happens, leaders and policies have followed what's already going on among parents. So let's just dive into it. As a way to orient you today, we'll be doing a lot about social norms. And when we think about this, parenting practices evolve, and parents, like everyone else, they have beliefs about what they themselves do. We have beliefs about what we think others do, and of course we have beliefs about what we think we should do. And having all those mutual expectations really provides the milieu in which we all do really important things, like being parents. And so what we're going to do today is talk about it first with the AAP policy statement in terms of the social norms among providers and how we do things. And then the bulk of the talk will be about what's going on with families, and then we'll have plenty of time for a conversation. So this is the policy statement. It came out in 2018. I was joined as lead author by Ben Siegel, a dear colleague, also at Boston Medical Center, recently retired from there. I just want to say that for those of you unfamiliar with the American Academy of Pediatrics, it's fun to have your name listed as an author, but this goes through a really extraordinarily exhausting review process, and there are many people in the Academy who added important content or important framing to it. And when it comes out as a policy statement, very different than a paper, it's already had dozens or maybe more than dozens of hands in it. So I'm very proud to have been one of the leaders in this, but want to acknowledge that it represents the opinion of 64,000 pediatricians in the United States who are members of the American Academy of Pediatrics and who have set up a very careful system for vetting anything that comes out as policy. So, social norms and parenting practices. Social norms play a really large role in determining what happens. So what do we do ourselves as parents? What do we think other parents do? Whose opinions do we value? And what do influencers think about? And I think you can say the same thing about those of us in practice. What do we do in our practice? What do we think other practitioners do? Whose opinions do they rely on? And what do those influencers think about? So one of the roles of a policy statement is to inform the social milieu in which all of us practice. So first of all, a long time ago, back in the 20th century, there was this idea that doctors and pediatricians were really interested in biomedical pursuits and understanding things like polio and strep throat and asthma was the main thing that we did. But more recently, surveys of pediatricians have shown that most pediatricians discuss discipline in 3/4 to all of routine checkups. And separate studies have shown that parents are likely to follow this advice, and half of parents report consulting their pediatrician for advice on discipline. So I think that that's one change that's already happened in our field. So the way we actually practice is kind of like eminence-based medicine. This is a medieval painting, and the man with the book on the top of the stairs is called an eminence grise, or a gray-haired old guy who knew everything. And these are all the king's advisors trying to find out the truth from this gray-haired, studious old man. And that's kind of the way most of us practice, that we know someone important whose opinion we value, or an organization like the Academy whose opinion we value, and then we follow it. And that's not a bad thing to do. It's the way it is. But what we aspire to is something different. It's evidence-based medicine. We like to do trials and use science to unearth the truth and what works and what doesn't. So what really happens is we have a system where policymakers use the evidence to form that learned opinion that people in practice can then follow, even if they don't have the time to do all the study of every issue that might come before them. And so this is why many of us spend so much time worrying about these kind of issues, because we think it does change the social environment in which practice occurs and can move practice along. When we wrote the policy statement, by the time we wrote it, the evidence against spanking was remarkable. Spanking is ineffective. Corporal punishment induces a cycle of escalating regression. aggression, I'm sorry. And for parents, they don't like to use corporal punishment. In fact, they use it as a last resort. And when they do use it, it has potential to risk suboptimal development for the children. So spanking is ineffective. There was a 2016 meta-analysis that showed that there was no long-term effectiveness. None of the studies were able to show long-term effectiveness of corporal punishment. And one thing, sometimes qualitative work can really illustrate and drive home what the ponderous quantitative studies showed. So in 2014, they did a study that analyzed voice recordings of parents interacting with their children. And when children were spanked, within 10 minutes, 3/4 of them, 73%, had resumed the behavior for which they had been punished. So, and it's kind of, there's a lot of conclusions from these voice studies. Very small study by itself, probably not significant, but as an illustration of what was going on in the larger statistically significant studies, it's really illuminating. And we also think, and there's a bunch of evidence, and this is a lot from the poorly named Fragile Family Study, which is a longitudinal study of children at ages 1, 3, 5, and 9 from several cities across the United States. And when they looked at the effects of corporal punishment and corrected for other causes of problem behavior, what they found was that each negative interaction reinforces prior negative interactions. So children who were spanked at one age, for example, 3 years old, they tend to be more aggressive at the next age, which is in this case 5 years old. Their parents may respond by spanking them more, which increases their own aggression, which makes them more likely to be spanked again at age 7. So they saw this cycle in this longitudinal study of thousands of children. Studies that looked at parents, and our group years ago did some small focus groups that really also illustrated the same point. The first thing parents do is reason with their children. And Joey, you know it hurts your brother when you do that. The next thing parents often do is yell, "Stop it!" And then withdrawal of privileges. If you do that again, something will happen to you. And then they might escalate to spanking. So this is a very orderly thing. When they reviewed those audio studies, all of these steps happened within 30 seconds. Within 30 seconds. So we think about it. And I think that one of the things that we now know about thinking is that we have very fast responses called type 1 thinking. And sometimes just slowing down and being more considerate and taking that extra breath can slow us down and make us more rational. And that's called type 2 thinking. Corporal punishment is a risk for child development, increased risk of physical injury and abuse. And for people who are listening to an APSAC recording or a webinar, I don't think you need to be convinced of that. It also increases childhood aggression, dating violence, and intimate partner violence perpetration. But think about it. If you grow up in a home where your parents, who all of us are programmed to love and admire at some level, or at the very least to think our parents are normal until we're teenagers, in which case we consider them abnormal. But if part of family life involves aggression, we'll use that ourselves as a problem solver. Importantly, though, corporal punishment can lead to children with mental health problems and even cognitive problems because it can interfere with learning. And there are many places on the web where it says if you spank your child and then give them a hug or otherwise show warmth, it avoids those problems. And would that it were so. All the studies show that parental warmth just makes it harder for the child to process all of these things. So why is this person who's supposed to love me hurting me? And there have been some more recent studies that look at structural brain changes that result from harsh discipline. And this diagram here is from a functional MRI, and it's done in a way that just shows connections between parts of the brain. And I'm using this to show that what happens in our brains is we're always making, forming, reforming and unforming connections. And when there's high cortisol levels and there's a lot of fear, we make connections that are perfect for when we live in a high stress environment where we need to be able to respond quickly. So our ancestors who saw a saber-toothed tiger approaching the cave in which they were living and said, it's time for us to form a task force to think about having a committee on how we're going to deal with saber-toothed tiger stress, we're less likely to lead to offspring than our ancestors who did something a little quicker. So it's not maladaptive, it's adaptive to an environment that's not a good environment. So there are changes that you can see in children who are consistently spanked. And I believe in this study, harsh discipline also included verbal belittling. So who does the spanking? So first of all, stressed parents spank more. And if you think about it, going through from reasoning through withdrawal of privileges to spanking, if you're feeling well-centered and well-fed and not too worried, you may have more patience. If you're already super stressed out because there's economic hardship, you're worried about making the rent or the food, or there's family violence, or you yourself have a problem with alcohol or other substances or a mental health issue, that trigger may go faster for you, because basically all children misbehave. It's how the adults respond that's important. So the summary is this AAP policy came out in 2018, and it came to be because at a prior leadership forum, the leaders of the Academy voted unanimously that we needed a stronger policy statement about corporal punishment. So social norms among providers, I don't think pediatricians are different than providers in other fields who also care for kids, that we know we discuss discipline, and each of us knows that we do spend time counseling about spanking. And now we think that other pediatricians also discuss discipline and also counsel about corporal punishment. And furthermore, in our own social norms, we believe we're expected to do this. So there's American Academy of Pediatric policy that we talked about, and also rapidly changing parental expectations, opinions, and questions that reinforce counseling around discipline and in favor of alternatives to corporal punishment. So that's by way of background about spanking. I'm going to stop for a moment and see if there are questions, and then we'll go into the feature presentation, which are changing generational changes in norms about corporal punishment. Are there questions or anything in the chat box?
Bob, at this point, we're not seeing any questions in the chat box.
Okay, well, let's keep moving then. So the title of today's talk is Good News. And the good news is about the changing social norms about corporal punishment. And, it turns out that parents of young children are themselves relatively young. And so these generational changes are actually right on target. It's right where they should be for children today to experience parenting without corporal punishment because of this generational change. So let's dive in. So social norms, again, there are three kinds of norms. Descriptive norms, what we actually do, or more accurately, most often, what we say we do in answer to a survey. Perceived norms, how we think that others behave, and injunctive norms, how we should behave. I was at a talk once, and I will not subject you all to this, where they used the idea of flossing your teeth as an example. So did you floss your teeth this morning? Do you think that the other 80-some people in the virtual room today floss their teeth? And how do you think we're supposed to do it? Think about all those many things where all of us have social norms where our own behavior may or may not agree with what we think others do and what we think we're supposed to do. In the 20th century, Strauss published a wonderful report called Corporal Punishment by American Parents. It was published in the Clinical and Family Psychology Review. And the key here was they were looking at ethnic and cultural differences in the use of corporal punishment. What they found, first of all, was that 94% of toddlers were spanked. And the factors that influenced it in this study that was reported in 1999, but obviously done before that, were there was a large, significant contribution in the socioeconomic status and ethnicity of the parents towards the use of corporal punishment. So once you adjusted for the effects of poverty and single parents and region of the United States, Black parents, their rate of corporal punishment was 70% compared to white parents at 60%. And region of the country was at the time extraordinarily important. That people in the southeastern part of the United States were more likely. This is an old study illustrated by the horse and buggy here. And many of us were taught this and believe this, that parents of certain races, ethnicity, and certain regions of the country spank their kids, and it's part of their cultural heritage. But let's look into it. A few years ago, in 2014, Adrian Peterson, a famous NFL ball player, beat his child and was arrested for corporal punishment. His actions, he defended his actions by saying that they were normal in his culture. He was an African-American man from the South. And what he said specifically was that he had been disciplined the same way as a child, and the way my parents disciplined me had a great deal to do with the success I have enjoyed as a man. This was a very polarizing statement because he said that he was prosecuted because he was Black, and that many Black people injured. These pictures are not very good, but he clearly beat his child, and there were multiple severe bruises. But there's a generational divide in beliefs, and I think he was expressing, and he even referred back to the way he was parented, he was expressing cultural norms that went back into the 20th century. And we'll talk about him again in a few minutes. But look what happened. This was a paper that was published in 2016 by Rebecca Ryan. And the two kinds of graphs, the dark gray and the light gray, this was published in 2016 before they discovered ink and cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Only had black then. So thank you for laughing over to that. So the wealthier families in 1988 were less likely to endorse physical punishment than poorer families, 90th percentile for wealth versus 10th percentile. And if in each of these time periods you look, that continues, people with lower incomes are more likely to endorse physical punishment. But look what happens over the years. First, there's a dramatic drop among wealthier Americans, those at 90th percentile for household income, followed very rapidly by a decline among poorer Americans, those who are at the 10th percentile. So that by 2011, which is when this study, the most recent data in this particular study, showed that 25% of low-income Americans endorsed physical punishment, and you can compare that to nearly 40% of wealthy Americans back in 1988. So a dramatic decline, as many trends are, first among wealthier Americans, followed a few years later by all Americans. YouGov.com did a survey that was purchased by the CDC, and Joanne Clevens was kind enough to share that with us for our own work on healthy outcomes of positive experiences. And what I want to show you is in this group of 416 American parents who answered this, those who said they seldom or never spanked, the differences between white, Black, and Hispanic adults who answered this was insignificant. Regardless of the race or the self-described race or ethnicity, by the time this study was done in 2017, when people described their own behavior, the descriptive of the norms, white parents said, about 60% of them said they sometimes spank their child, maybe 50% of Black parents and 40% of Hispanic parents. But really, within the era of this particular study, the way it was done, they were all the same. But certainly, there was not a difference between Black and white parents. And in the same study, there were 2,000 US adults. And we got somewhat different results from those who didn't have kids at home, who were generally older. Very interesting way to think about it. And we asked people what they thought they were supposed to do. Black parents were slightly more likely than white parents to express that they were supposed to use corporal punishment. So a pretty interesting difference, because already their own behavior was much more like the behavior of other people of similar age than it was dictated or determined or predicted by a person's race or ethnicity. And then at the same time, we also, Becca Ryan in the same study, looked at how people endorsed the use of timeouts. And again, same pattern. You can see the use of timeouts increased from 1988 to 2011, and also increased regardless of socioeconomic status. So it wasn't that parents were just letting their children run wild. They were using evidence-based, recommended alternatives to corporal punishment. So now, and I think that what what led to my invitation to lead this chat today was a paper that was just published in JAMA Pediatrics. It was actually a letter by Dr. Mehus and colleagues, and they did a really interesting study. They had national samples going back to 1993, and they took parents who were 35 years old at the time of the study. So this is not following the same individuals from 1992 to 2018. It's following then 35-year-olds through that period. And this, of course, is the age when, typical age for parents in the United States. And you can see that there was a statistically significant, consistent drop in the prevalence of spanking. Do you spank your children among US parents? I mean, it's still higher than I want. It's still more than a third of parents. But you can see that 35-year-olds in the United States really went from roughly half endorsing physical punishment to a little more than a third. So in a study where it's controlled for age, this is a pretty dramatic result. So why is this? So I've thought about this. There's not a lot of data. So now we're moving from really hard, solid data to Dr. Bob's speculations. So I think that what's happening is there's been a decline in the acceptance of violence in the home. And this chart shows a dramatic drop in domestic violence really in the 1990s. So that by 2000, the rate of domestic violence fell from about 10 per thousand to about 4 to 5 per thousand. It stayed roughly at that same not low enough rate since then, but you can see there's been a big change in the acceptance of intimate partner violence. So one thing I think is going on is that social norms regarding violence at home are changing, and violence against children may simply be reflecting that general change in our beliefs about how we treat people we love. So I want to go through and say a little bit more about this, and going back to the social norms. We all know that parents do the best they can, and most parents do the best they can. And if you ask parents, and that was what was asked in the recent survey, they are more likely to describe themselves as saying, "I don't hit my child." That social norm, called a descriptive norm, has changed. And we now find that on the internet, information about positive discipline is easily available. It may not have been easily available a while ago. And just a little side note, and maybe people have ideas about this, when I looked up discipline and I looked for images to share with you, because I like pictures, far and away, the individuals shown in the illustrations about parenting your child that referred to discipline were showed boys and men. And I'm not up on the current statistics, but I believe that half of the children are female. And I think that occasionally women spend time with their children as well. So very interesting, talking about social norms, you can't help but notice that sort of thing. In any event, it's easy to get information about discipline on the web, and most American parents who are currently parenting their young children describe themselves as, I don't hit my child. So the social norm of what we describe ourselves as doing has changed in this generation. Now, I showed you before Adrian Peterson and his comment that the way he treated his child was a cultural norm. And I just want to say there was very rapid and very effective feedback about that from other individuals. So Chris Carter, who's also African-American, commented on ESPN about Adrian Peterson. And what he said was, and he himself was spanked as a child, just like Adrian was. And Adrian had said, I came out the way I did. But what Chris Carter said was, my mom did the best job she could do raising 7 kids by herself. But there are thousands of things that I've learned since then that my mom was wrong. It's the 21st century. My mom was wrong. She did the best she could, but she was wrong about some of the stuff she taught me. And I promised my kids I won't teach that mess to them. So now what you're hearing is there's a pushback that just because that's the way we were raised from someone from the same general racial and ethnic group, that he thinks it's wrong. And from this, many people concluded or have concluded that most people like me, whether it's your part of the country or your background or heritage, most people like me don't hit their children. So a very important effect of that highly publicized story was the realization when parents talk to each other that most people like me don't hit their children. So this is a perceived social norm that I think really got a boost by this unfortunate event. And finally, I know those of us who have talked about corporal punishment are always afraid that religious people say, spare the rod, spoil the child, and that we have some battle of the faiths. I don't think that's actually true anymore. So we're now finding that there's been a change in an injunctive social norm. So again, a little web searching didn't take very long. I found this guidance from the Shiloh Baptist Church in King George, Virginia. And I made this map because King George, Virginia is pretty much near nothing. You can get there from Washington. There aren't any highways there, but and this is what they posted on their website under parenting. The purpose of our children's ministry is to help each child associate God, Jesus, and the Bible with happy feelings, to think of church as my church, a place where people love me, to think of home and family as a place of love and security, to begin thinking of others and adjusting to their interests. And then on the next page, it said, spanking or belittling a child on Shiloh Baptist grounds is not to take place under any circumstances. This goes beyond saying our staff won't do this. It says no one should. And so this is from a religious source, not necessarily a very, I don't know them very well, but I'm going to go out and say they may be a little bit less liberal than other churches, but this message is coming out everywhere. And so what Americans are learning now is the injunctive social norm, what we think we should do, has also changed. People I trust and respect, whether it's a sports commentator or the church you attend, don't think I should hit my child. So we've seen a sea change. It's really dramatic. So in summary, corporal punishment is and has been for quite a while on the decline in the United States. And when you're thinking about public opinion and what you hear from blowhards on the radio or tweets or anywhere else, ask yourself, how old is that person? And do they still have young children at home? And you will find, as I did in my informal survey of radio call-in people who engaged with us after the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement came out, and you will find that the older a person is, the more likely they are to endorse corporal punishment, which has the really wonderful benefit that younger adults who are raising children now are less likely to believe in corporal punishment. So don't pay too much attention to overall voices, but pay attention to parents, what parents say they do, what they think other parents do, and what they think they are supposed to do. And I think that I'm sure Murray Strauss was right, because he's right about almost anything. But what we've seen in more recent data is cultural, ethnic, and racial differences in the use of corporal punishment have declined. That American adults are more likely to think like their generational peers than they are likely to be easily categorized by where they come from and what they look like. And this is really important because we work in a field in child welfare which has a very disappointing history of, I have to say it, of racism. That Black children are more likely to be reported, white children who have been abused are more likely to be overlooked. And this happens for structural reasons like where you go for care, where you bring a child for medical care, what school you go to, and also for all the reasons of implicit bias that I think we're quite familiar with. So I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that you can't tell what a parent believes or how they think about the job of being a parent simply by looking at them and making an assessment of their race or ethnicity or making assumptions about it. So for those of us who are interested in prevention, the message is really clear that we need to continue offering support for parenting approaches that work. Because if you take an individual whose recollections of childhood involved corporal punishment, and now they've evolved this belief that this is not a good idea, children are still going to misbehave. They're still going to need to have their behavior corrected. They still need to be taught right from wrong. So if you think about child abuse, particularly child physical abuse, resulting when parents lose it, if they have effective techniques for managing their child's behavior, maybe they're less likely to lose it. Second thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, in the current time with the economic collapse of the pandemic, that struggling families need concrete support. That parents who are stressed because they're worried about eviction or because they don't have enough food, they're going to be closer to the edge that differentiates the normal parent who kind of barely muddles through from the parent who really loses it. Concrete supports, advocating for expansion of SNAP, for support for families so they don't get evicted, all of those things will be likely to result in reduced child abuse. I think the best evidence for that is in the pre-pandemic times, all the way back to February. It's been shown that paid family and medical leave decreases the incidence of severe child abuse of infants. And that's not because it's accompanied by teaching, it's because it changes the environment so that parents are less stressed at that really difficult time when a new baby joins their life. The other thing is, for those of us who interact with kids and parents all the time, it's hard to do it. Providing appreciation for the parents and understanding that almost all parents want to do right by their children really goes a long way towards effectively preventing either child abuse in the first place or recurrent child abuse, certainly for physical abuse and neglect. This is sort of the end of my formal remarks. I wanted to leave a bunch of time for questions, and I see the chat box is blinking on my screen. So let's have a discussion about this. I'm very curious about how the people in this room who are really in this field think about what I've said.
So Bob, this is Janet, and let me tell you, in the chat box, one of the questions people would like you to address is if a pediatric client reports that they've been hit by a parent, should that trigger a call to Child Protective Services?
We are not at a point in the United States where spanking or corporal punishment is illegal or by itself constitutes child protection. A child abuse issue that's the subject of child protection involvement. What I would do is view it as triggering two things for me. One is more information, like what do you mean hit your child? And what else is going on? We know there's an association, for example, between intimate partner violence and the use of corporal punishment. There's an association between other family stresses ranging from economic stress to substance use. So maybe there's more going on there, be worth knowing. And assuming that all of those things are addressed or not a problem, the next thing is helping parents with problem solving and understanding, depending on the age of the child, what's going on in the kid's head. And what I often did when I was in primary care was ask parents to describe to me a typical situation that drives them crazy that a child does. And get a lot of stories. It did not take parents very long to think about that. And one of my favorites was a 3-year-old who wouldn't eat. And so I said, so what happens? And he said, well, we have dinner and he won't eat by himself. So I pick up the food with a spoon and I put it in his mouth, and he jumps off his chair and he runs around the kitchen. And I said, okay, and what happens next? And so we run around, I chase him with a spoon and try to get him to eat. I'm trying my hardest to get him to eat. Said, what happens then? And he said, well, we both laugh. And I said, your child is brilliant. He has invented this awesome game with mom, where the two of them at dinner time, instead of eating this boring food, they run around and play tag and they laugh. So to really think about from the child's point of view, what's actually happening, that's an easy one, but you can often help them understand what's going on and give an example of a particular behavior that they can control. So I think that providing approaches for them. So what I decided earlier on in my practice was I wasn't going to convince people whose values were spare the rod and spoil the child that they shouldn't hit their kid. But I could convince them that their child didn't need to be spanked because their child is so good. And the reason the child's so good is because the parents provided consistent, clear, easy to understand guidance. Just like parents want to be good parents, kids deep down want to be good. So it's possible to do this. And I think that would be my general approach.
We also received a question. Sorry, Janet, did you have something? This one came in to me privately. It was a question about addressing corporal punishment in schools. Any recommendations?
I think that under no circumstances should children be hit in school. I think it's wrong. I think there are so many issues involved in that it shouldn't happen. So that's my opinion. And I was talking with a leader in Kansas, and in Kansas, corporal punishment is allowed in school. And she was not in favor of making it outlawed. And the reason is because data in Kansas suggested that it was rarely, if ever, used. And she was afraid if they raised it as an issue, it would bring the crazies out. And so there would be a different discussion. I'm not in Kansas. I don't know about the politics, but I just want to be really clear. I think it should be illegal. I don't think that children should ever be hit at school.
So
and the American Academy of Pediatrics has been very strong on that for many years, and there's really kind of no waffling on that one.
So there is a national organization that has taken that issue very seriously. And Stacy Leblanc, the APSAC president, can I impose on you to speak for a second about the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment?
Sure. So the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment, which Dr. Sege and Dr. Corwin and Dr. Viola Von Eden, who's also on this call or member as was Janet, originally met 2 years ago in October, in New York. We gathered, there were 40 of us, and had a roundtable and developed a bunch of committees. And I currently chair the No Hit Zone Committee, which Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey was the first to become, and have really disseminated it to other Baptist churches. And we also have the Catholic Church joining on with that initiative. So we're really excited about what's going on, but we have our first ever annual conference coming up, and we want to invite all of you to save the date. The registration, which is going to be at an incredibly reduced rate, will be coming out very shortly. First, we want you to sign up for the colloquium, our first ever virtual amazing colloquium with 3 tracks. That's in September, but save the date for October 15th, and you'll hear about all the work that has been going on in the committees with policies and other directives to help people with these initiatives, to get faith leaders, and to help pediatricians with resources. And I also want to give a plug, Bree, thank you so much for putting in the chat. APSAC has developed, the No Hit Zone Committee has developed materials. There were some questions about what could I do to give to parents. There's a really great one-pager that you can preview at the APSAC No Hit Zone link in the chat, and you can order these. I mean, and they're at no profit to APSAC, but truly it is where you can get a bulk copy, a bunch of these to give out to parents. I just was presenting to home visitors who were giving those out in bulk to parents. And we also have a book that I received no profit from on painless parenting, a way to talk to parents. So, and we do have a lot of questions, Dr. Sege, that are coming in about talking to parents and resources to parents. You have such an amazing way. I love how you talk about what's the thing that drives you the craziest, because parents are very eager to share there and addressing that. And so what we did at APSAC is we developed them, and I see Ellen's on this call too, by ages and stages. So what you would say to the parent of a toddler is completely different to a parent of a teenager who might be struggling with potential sexting and other resources. So we want to make sure that we're giving them information for all different ages and stages. And we've developed that, and we had a lot of parenting experts to give advice on that. So please save the date for October 15th and come back to the APSAC website to sign up for that event, since hopefully you now want to learn more. Dr. Corwin, did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to say that Mel is also on this call, and Mel chairs the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment. Mel, show yourself. Turn your video on.
Mel?
Where are you, Mel? Come on.
There he is.
All right, there he is. Mel, there's our leader, Mel Schneiderman from New York Foundling, the director of the Vincent J. Fontana Center for Child Protection. Protecting children, Mel? I always blow it slightly. Why'd you correct me?
Oh,
okay.
I'm on mute. Yes, it's the Vincent J. Fontana Center for Child Protection. You were correct, Dave.
I got it right. Oh, good. Slap on the back. Thank you. That's Mel Schneiderman. He's been instrumental in pulling this effort together to end corporal punishment in the United States. And I remember a couple of things I meant to say in introducing Bob Sege, and I'm just going to squeeze him in real fast. He's one of the smartest people who I've ever known. He's both a double doc, MD, PhD, and a triple threat. His undergraduate degree is from Yale. His PhD in biology is from MIT, and his medical diploma, Doctor of Medicine, is from Harvard. So they don't, achievement-wise, I hope that didn't make people not like you, Bob, but.
Yeah, well, but by far the best thing I got out of all those degrees is I met my wife at medical school, so all worth it.
How sweet.
So I just put up on the screen the 10 healthy discipline strategies from the AAP. So pediatricians have access to all these, and you'll notice that they really try to be simple. Show and tell, set limits, give consequences, hear them out. There are, if you look on the web, there are a bunch of things like the Shiloh Baptist Church from Virginia that I brought up that has information. Many parents will need more hands-on kind of support, particularly parents whose memories of childhood did not include a lot of warmth. And there may be resource centers, many of you may be involved in family resource centers. And there are a bunch of ways to help parents through this. If you're sympathetic and understand what's available and choose for them what resource you think is going to resonate with them the best, whether it's from the AP or from APSAC or from their church or in a different language, or mom and baby group, all different ways. But I think that we now live in a world where there's a lot of information that's available to do that.
You know, we only have a couple minutes left. I like to see who's watching these webinars. If you're willing, you know, you don't have to turn your cameras on, but I'm glad to see we have at least one consumer over here, Amna. So the field of child maltreatment is sometimes criticized for not listening to the people who, you know, the children, but I'm glad we have a child present.
And while we're doing that, I'd like to respond. There's also a question in the chat box is, will this, you know, was this recorded? Yes, APSAC does record all of our webinars and Zoom chats. You can find them on our webpage, apsac.org. Under resources, choose videos, and you'll go to a wonderful video library where probably within a week you'll find this video, but now you'll find all of our prior Zoom chats and webinars as well. And again, I'll remind you, all of the resources that people have been mentioning, if you scroll through the chat box, you'll find the links for many things that you'll be able to use to take back to your agency and your community. Any final questions?
Thank you for noticing my picture.
Beautiful baby.
I know, I'm Nutella lover.
Yeah. I'll give you all a little treat. I wasn't going to do this. I was going to show a more distinguished background, but this is the view off of my back deck.
There's his hummingbirds.
My hummingbirds at that feeder up there.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That's beautiful, Dave.
Thank you.
That's every night at his house. So he tells us. We keep wondering if it's a repeat, but he has different birds. But thank you, Dr. Sege, for being with us yet again and leading us in all you've done for the AAP. We appreciate it.
It's really an honor to be. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. And if you want more information about what we're doing now, you can just send an email to hope, HOPE, at tuftsmedicalcenter.org, and we'll connect you with some material that we've been producing, as well as answer any questions that you might have.
And you, Bob, are one of our best hopes.
Oh.
And I just want to summarize what you've said here. And this kind of betrays maybe the gray hair. Are you telling us it's no longer cool to hit your kids?
Pretty much. And what a wonderful sea change that's been. And I think that as we understand what families are struggling with, understanding that and not assuming that people will be doing something and arguing with them about something they don't do anyway, or if they do, they already feel bad about it, is going to really go a long way.
Dr. Sege, on behalf of APSAC, our board, our staff, our membership, and all of the friends that joined us on this call today, thank you for what you did here for us this afternoon and what you do for children and families throughout your career. This has been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us.